Lisa's powerful journey through grief and loss has shaped her into a passionate voice for change. And she has become a beacon of hope for so many. From her personal battles with depression to her advocacy for mental health awareness, Lisa has used her story to encourage others to seek for help, speak openly about their struggles, and stand strong in their truth. As a writer and speaker, Lisa's work has touched countless of lives, offering both comfort and guidance for those facing the darkest times. Today, she will share her personal story of survival, how she navigates the challenges of mental health, and the critical importance of creating a safe and inclusive spaces for the LGBTQ community. Whether you're looking for inspiration, practical advice on coping with mental health, or simply want to hear a powerful message of hope and healing, please join me in welcoming Lisa Sugarman to the show. Welcome to Out of the Closet into the World, the podcast where we'll break down walls, lift up voices, and celebrate the strength of being your true self. I'm your host, Ada Arancibia. We will hear inspiring stories of people who have faced challenges and embrace who they really are. Join me on this journey of honesty, empowerment, and change. Together, let's step out of the closet and into the world. Let's dive in. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for the honor of accepting the invitation to be on the show today. I am truly grateful for your time and your presence. How are you doing today?
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I couldn't be happier that we made this work, and I'm thrilled to be able to have this conversation.
I am excited and I cannot wait to learn more about your journey. Lisa, you have had such an inspiring journey. Can you take us back to your early childhood and share what that time in your life was like?
Sure. I mean, that's a time in my life that I remember with just such joy and such fondness. When I think about my childhood, I mean, I was an only child. I'm the product of a mom and a dad who absolutely adored each other. They just couldn't get enough of each other. I had just this, I guess all I keep going back to is the word joyful upbringing, because I was encouraged always to be outgoing and to be curious and to move my body and to ask the questions. And my parents were just such passionate believers in just enjoying childhood and being a kid. And so I always got the chance to do that. It wasn't until I was 10 years old that things changed. Things changed drastically. My life, I think, was never the same after that point. I lost my father. He was 45 years old. I had just turned 10 years old and had this brilliant, bright little childhood. And then everything was turned completely upside down.
Wow. Your story really highlights how our early experiences shape how we become. It's amazing to see how those formative years have helped guide you to where you are now. And it seems like your childhood played a key role in understanding not just yourself, but the world around you. How do you think those early moments of self-discovery still influence the way that you approach mental health and advocacy today?
As you and I were talking about in the green room before we started recording, I had this relationship with my parents that even though I was young when both of my parents were still living, they were very open with me. They were very honest with me. I understood that people struggled, that not everyone lived in a town like mine or had two parents who loved me like mine. So I was really aware, acutely aware of the world around me. And the year before my father passed away, we lost my cousin to suicide. And my parents were very, very honest with me, in as much as you can be honest with a 9-year-old child about someone taking their life, but they were. And so I understood that he was sick and it was a different kind of sickness. And so I understood that not everyone is wired the same way from a very young age. can't say that I understood it then the way that I obviously understand it now, or the way that we discuss it now, because it's so different. It's such a completely different world in terms of what we understand and how we understand it and how we communicate it. But just having the experience of losing a family member so early, and he was young, he was 18. I was
Oh,
9 at the
wow.
time. Yeah, yeah. He lived maybe a quarter of a mile up the street. My mother's older sister lived up the street. And so that was a hard lesson to learn at a really super young age. And it really kind of defined my understanding of suicide at a very early age. And it wasn't because of anything my parents told me, but it kind of ingrained this belief system that suicide was selfish. Because as a 10-year-old kid, no one's really talking to you about what suicide was or what it really meant, and those nuances that make it so unique. I just understood that he had died because his brain was sick and he couldn't go on, and it was explained to me in those terms, but I internalized it like it was a selfish act. And I kept that belief all the way through until I was probably in my own mid 40s. And it wasn't until I learned that my own father, who I lost when I was 10, had actually died by suicide. I didn't find that out for 35 years. When I found that out, it just unlocked something in me, and really completely shifted my belief again about suicide. And I understood that it was something that was completely beyond his control or anyone else's control. And so it's been, they say it's a journey. It has
Right.
definitely been a journey for sure.
Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. Now, growing up, did you always know that you wanted to be a writer or an or advocate?
Didn't know I wanted to be an advocate, although I probably should have, because when I think about the way I am wired and the way I've always been wired, I've always been a highly sensitive person, always been that empathic personality type who's always felt everybody's vibes and vibrations
Energy.
and energy very, very deeply. So I don't think it's it was very much of a stretch that I ended up in the advocacy world, because I've always wanted to help whomever I could help, especially people who were less fortunate or who were hurting. But I just didn't understand what it meant at the time when I was young. But it did shape who I am at my core. It absolutely did. And it's all the other experiences that I've had since then that have brought me to this point now. But writing, always done it since I was 5 years old.
Mm,
Writing is something
that's beautiful.
I've done, always wanted to do. I was creating little neighborhood newspapers when I was 5 or 6 years old. And that was something that's kind of been hardwired into me since I can remember.
What was your path to finding your voice in both writing and activism?
Well, they came at two different times. The activism came much, much later. That came as a result of discovering that my father had died by suicide, and taking all of these other losses by suicide that I've unfortunately accumulated in my life, with my cousin as well as a close childhood friend. So that advocacy piece started much, much later in my life, probably in my 50s. But in terms of wanting to be a writer and wanting to create content and getting involved first as a parenting author. I was in the parenting space for a really long time. I mean, I write what I know, and I have two daughters. And at the time I was writing about them and about the work-life balance and about marriage and about kind of emotional wellness and EQ and IQ and all these different kind of lifestyle topics. And I did that for a very, very long time until I learned about my father's suicide. And that just shattered me. It absolutely shattered me. I found out very much by accident about 11 years ago, just through a conversation with a family member who made a very strange comment, asked me if I had noticed any of the same types of mental illness in my children that I noticed in my father. And I had no idea what she was talking about. Had no idea that my father had been mentally ill. And so it just started this chain reaction of questioning and ultimately asking my mother if my father had been depressed, and she said yes. And then, without even knowing where the question was coming from, I asked her one day if my father had taken his life, and she said yes. And she had always always planned on keeping that a secret, had never intended to tell me. And every time she thought she might, then I was graduating high school, then I was going to college, then I was getting married. Then you reach a point, or she reached a point where she didn't think that it was really relevant, that it mattered anymore. And so she promised herself she would keep that to herself, and she did for 35 years. But she also promised me she'd never lie to me. And so when I ultimately surprised her and myself by asking, she told me the truth, and it just completely put me on a new path. I couldn't, in good conscience, create content in any other space anymore. It felt way too important to me. Once I understood, this new epidemic that we have, this mental illness epidemic and this suicide epidemic, I had to do something with my own lived experience, and I've tried to create content across the spectrum of mental health and that space ever since.
Mm. Now, finding your voice is such a powerful journey, and it's clear that your path wasn't always straight.
Mm.
It's inspiring to hear how your personal growth led you to not just write, but to also become a voice for change. What was it about writing and activism that felt so natural for you?
I've always been in my head. I've always been in my head. I've always been in my feels ever since I can remember. And I've always expressed myself. I feel like I've expressed myself the best on paper. And, I say on paper, obviously it's not on paper anymore in the way that it used to be back in the day. But I think everybody's voice is a work in progress. My voice is a work in progress. I'm a lot more raw and unfiltered now, just I think by nature of what I talk about. I've always, whatever I'm writing about, whether it's parenting space or work life or mental health, I've always written in a really conversational way. That's just the tone. It's like we're having a conversation, or it's like I'm just having a bit of a brain dump. But so that part of it has never really changed. And I don't expect that it ever would really change. What has changed is the way I communicate. It's not only what
Mm.
I'm writing about, what I'm talking about, but it's how I'm talking about it. And I'm trying to be as transparent and vulnerable and raw and honest as I can be, because I feel like that's what's going to serve people who are consuming my content the best, whether it's video content or books or magazine articles or columns. I just feel like the more honest I am in the way that I communicate, the more permission it gives other people to be vulnerable and to be open and transparent, because it's only through doing that that we can start to break apart this stigma, because people are so afraid of being honest. They're afraid of being perceived as weak. They're afraid of being vulnerable and getting hurt. There's so many different reasons why people don't share, whether it's their mental health and wellness, or whether it's their sexuality or their gender, or even nowadays their political beliefs. People are afraid of getting attacked or being judged. So the more of us who come out and do these things unapologetically, the better. So that's a kind of the evolution of if my voice, if that answers the question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Being authentic is so important. How do you think these two passions work together to create a bigger impact?
Well, I think that I've spent so much time now, all these years, putting my voice out there, putting my beliefs out into the world in so many different ways. And, now that I'm working as a crisis counselor with the Trevor Project, and I work with the National Alliance on Mental Illness as a storyteller, and I work with Samaritans as a survivor of suicide loss grief group facilitator. So I work and have connections now in all of these places and spaces. I work as a volunteer for a lot of other organizations and crisis organizations. And I think that my ability to just be able to communicate what my own experience as a survivor is, or what my own experience as a crisis counselor may be, I think it just adds a level of maybe credibility that I'm also aligned with all of these organizations doing all this work. I think it just helps we help elevate each other. They're wonderful about putting my work on people's radar. I'm I try to be as conscious about putting theirs on people's radar. So I think it's just a giant collaboration. It feels like a giant collaboration at this point, where everyone I'm fortunate enough to work with is just really concerned with spreading the same message.
Absolutely. How long have you been working with the Trevor Project?
So I have been active as a crisis counselor on their phone lines, on their crisis lifeline now for about 2.5 years.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. As a three-time suicide loss survivor, Lisa, you have been through an incredible personal challenges. Can you tell us how those experiences shape your approach to mental health and the way that you advocate for others?
Well, I mean, my belief system, because of the education I've gotten from organizations like Trevor and Samaritans and American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, all these organizations that I either volunteer with or I'm aligned with, it's really helped to crystallize my own views on mental illness and mental wellness and not being okay and being honest about that. So it's just allowed me, these experiences have all combined to allow me to feel more confident in my own voice, more
Mm,
confident in sharing my own experiences. It gives your fire a little bit of fuel when you have
yeah.
these kinds of relationships and you have these kinds of outlets to draw on. And I'm lucky that I have a lot of them, and it's influenced my work and it's influenced how I counsel when I've got people on phone lines and they're in crisis. And it's been I'm an ongoing work in progress, I think, in terms of how I approach counseling and how I approach the content that I create. But, I'm just very fortunate to be in this space and to be so able to help people across so many different groups and communities. And I can't picture a time when I wouldn't be on a lifeline, where I wouldn't be working with Trevor, where I wouldn't be continuing to do the work that I'm doing, because I feel like it's just too important to elevate this work above any other kind of work I could be doing.
Absolutely. Your resilience in the face of such profound loss is truly remarkable. It's clear that your experiences have given you a unique perspective on mental health and suicide. You have turned grief into action. And I'm curious, how do you stay motivated to continue advocating when the work can be so emotionally draining and challenging?
I appreciate that question a lot, because there are a lot of us out there who are in this position of supporting and helping people who are in crisis.
Yeah.
Lots of, this is a shout out to all the therapists, all the crisis counselors, lifeline counselors. It's a very demanding, emotionally demanding job, whether it's your full-time job or whether it's a volunteer position. And it's very difficult to separate. It's difficult to avoid being triggered. It's difficult to sometimes keep your emotions in check and to keep yourself grounded. And in my case, I lean really, really heavily into my daily practices. I've always had a really strong kind of non-negotiable daily practice that I lean into. And I do a lot of meditating. I get out in nature. I'm a runner. I do a lot of weightlifting. I practice yoga. I make sure to separate myself. And I know that a lot of other therapists and counselors who are doing this heavy, heavy work, they do the same thing. And it's not to say that that works every time. There are times when I absolutely 1,000% get, overwhelmed or get impacted or triggered. But I think you just have to know your own limits. And I've made a deal with myself a long, long time ago that I would honor that part of me that might get triggered or might feel overwhelmed by something. And I would either step away or take time off or somehow find a different outlet. And so far I've been able to strike that balance, and it's a day-to-day process.
What inspired you to start speaking out about mental health, and why is it something you are so passionate about?
Well, I mean, I think everybody who does anything like this, who does any kind of work of any kind of service work whatsoever, has their why. And my why is my father, and kind of preserving his legacy and honoring his life and honoring the struggles that I didn't know until he was gone that he had. So for me, my father, and of course the other people I've lost in particular to suicide, are kind of lumped together in that why. But as far as how I started, like I said before, it was a completely organic and very unexpected turn that my career took. I was not expecting it. I mean, if 4 or 5 years ago you had suggested even that I would be in this space doing this kind of work, I would have thought you were insane, because I wouldn't have known how I would have possibly made it to this point. But it's funny how things happen. So it was actually a podcast. A podcast interview changed everything for me.
Mm.
I had not mentioned anything. I had not written a word about my father's suicide yet. This goes back this is, I would say, in probably 2020. It was, I think, the beginning of the pandemic. And I had gotten to the point where I knew the truth about my father's suicide, and I had spent the first few years not really talking about it with anybody. No one knew, just my husband and my mom. And I hadn't even told my children yet, but I eventually moved to a place of being able to have those conversations. And that became my new narrative, and that became the truth. And that's what I shared, and my family and friends and my children knew. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wasn't talking about it yet. And ironically, it was International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. So it was right around this time of year, maybe 5 years ago, when I decided to make a post. And it was just a simple sharing of my story and acknowledging that day and what it meant for me. And there was a podcaster who is out of Canada, who I had no connection to her whatsoever. She has a very successful podcast about suicide and loss. And she reached out. She saw my piece. The hashtag came up, and my piece resonated with her. And she asked if I would be interested in sharing my story and coming on as a guest. And I had never considered doing something like that. But I just felt like it was time. I felt like that was the next logical thing for me to do, and I did. And it was because of the feedback that I got from doing that. It was because of the comments and people reaching out to me and thanking me for being open and being vulnerable and sharing what I had gone through. I saw all of that feedback from one single episode. And
Mm.
I think that's what just kind of lit the fuse. And it's just, the fuse has been lit, and I don't expect it will ever go out, because I'm too motivated now to keep doing what I'm doing.
Wow. It's so inspiring to hear how deeply committed you are to this cause. Speaking about mental health is not easy, but
Mm-mm.
your passion really shines through.
Thank
Why
you.
do you think it's so important for others to see advocates like you be open about their own struggles?
I think it just creates a safe space. I think
Mm.
when any of us come out and challenge something that, we know we need to challenge, like public perceptions, our belief systems, when we start being open and honest and talking about what's on our minds, and what we've experienced and the hard things that we've navigated, then it just creates a culture of people feeling like they can do the same thing. It's just a domino effect. I mean, the whole thing is intended to be a giant domino effect of one person sharing their truth, and then that inspires another and another, and it just kind of permeates our culture, and changes our culture. I mean, we look no further than the LGBTQ movement, and
Right.
what we've gained. I mean, what we are now able to talk about. Obviously, at this exact moment in history, things, feels like we've taken a little bit of a slide backwards. But unfortunately, hopefully, we'll, just continue to move forward. But it's like that. It's
Mm.
getting out and sharing your authentic self, or sharing your authentic beliefs, or your experience, or your failures, and letting people see that inspires people to do the same thing.
It's all about having, a voice and being able to empower those around you.
Well, it's like anything. I mean, when we're taught to believe that something is taboo and
Hmm.
it becomes a global belief system, that's a really hard thing to attack and change. And we do that effectively by having conversations like you and I are having, by writing about it, by speaking about it, by sharing how we feel about it or our experiences with it. And that's how we break the stigma. It's not an overnight thing. I wish it was an overnight thing. I wish there was a button we could all just hit and that would be that and everything would change for the better. But sadly, it doesn't work like that. Stigmas are very difficult things. Whatever the stigma might be, they're difficult things to break apart. So we have to do it little pieces at a time, because small change, a lot of small change, when you add it all up together, that's big change. We just don't see it that way right away.
That's powerful. One of the things that stands out about your work is how open you are about your own struggles with depression and
Mm-hmm.
loss.
Mm.
How do you think sharing your story helps others who may be struggling in silence?
Well, I mean, I look no further than my own father, who clearly was struggling in silence. My mother didn't know. I was 10, but I had no sense that anything was wrong with my father. When we are dealing with something as destructive as mental illness and we're dealing with it alone, we're stuck in a thought loop. Whatever our thought loop is, however negative it might be, if we're not telling someone that these are the things we're thinking, these are the things we're feeling, these are the actions we're considering taking, then we're alone in our own head. And
Mm,
we're alone with those feelings, and they can be so contaminating and they can permeate everything and they can alter your thinking and your sense of reality and your ability to make good decisions. And ultimately, that's what drives people to make decisions like taking their own lives, because they have no other influence to draw on. It's just the mental illness that's hijacking their common sense. When we talk about things, when you say to somebody, "Look, I'm really not okay. Like, I don't know what I am, but I'm not okay and I know that." Then that starts a conversation, that opens a door, that creates a dialogue where someone can feel safe and seen and heard. And you have the ability to then reach in and figure out what's wrong and figure out how to address it and how to deal with it. So being vulnerable and sharing what's going on is that critical, it's that X factor in, honestly, not to be blunt, but in keeping someone alive. It can
yeah,
be, it can be the difference between life and death when it's a matter of being able to understand what someone's going through and see it and help.
absolutely. Your openness really sets a powerful example for others. It's one thing to talk about mental health from an intellectual perspective, but it's another to be so vulnerable. And that's one quality that I can see that you do have. What have been some of the most rewarding moments when someone has shared their own story with you because of your openness?
I think that's what keeps driving me forward in all this. It's the people who have reached out to me, people who have slid into my DMs, or people who have reached me through my website, or people who have, you know, people I know who have texted me or somehow found a way to connect with me. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
people I know, more often it's people I don't know. I continue to be amazed at the number of people who will share with me what my content, maybe a column, or maybe it's a video, or maybe it's a book, or maybe it's something they've heard me say in an interview that just struck them, that resonated, that helped them. And I'm humbled by that. Like, I'm incredibly humbled by that. It's funny, I go back to my mother in the early years after the truth came out about my father, about 8 or 10 years ago. I remember my mom saying to me, first above anyone else, she said, "Someday I know you, and someday you're going to want to write about this, and I want you to feel like you have permission to do that. Like, I want you to be able to take this wherever you feel like you want to take this." And I remember thinking, like, I can't even imagine doing that right now. That's not even in my thought process. I can't get there now. But she kept saying, if you say one thing to one person that changes the outcome for that one person, anything that you could say or do would have been worth it. And so that's happened so many times, whether it's on a lifeline, whether, I start a call with someone who's at imminent risk of suicide, and 2 hours later, we're wrapping up that call and that person has a safety plan and that person has been de-escalated and that person is feeling hopeful again and that person knows what they're going to do to move forward and how they can support themselves. And they say, I don't know if I'd be here if it wasn't for this phone call. Like that's something that I don't know what greater gift a human can get than that, than knowing that you've said or done something to keep someone here, to make someone change, their trajectory when they're about to make that, that life-altering choice. So that's the end game for me. All of that is the end game for me.
You have experienced loss to suicide, something many people are afraid to talk about. Why do you think there's still such a stigma around mental health and suicide? And what can we do to change that?
Well, I think what we can do is do what we're doing, which is to talk about it and keep talking about it and say it as often as we can. I also think that we have to be open in these conversations. We have to be checking in on each other. We have to be encouraging each other to be transparent and to be honest about how we're feeling. I think that's the biggest thing. And what is frightening for a lot of people, which is why the stigma is still here, I think people don't want it to be stigmatized, but people just don't know what to do with it. That's why people aren't using the word suicide as regularly as they should be. I think we should be able to say the word suicide. I know it's a scary word, but if we're understanding that suicide is a byproduct of a mental illness, and we don't have to get to that point where someone chooses suicide, then it doesn't have to be stigmatized. It doesn't have to continue to be scary. The more open and the more honest we are, the more we talk about it and keep talking about it, I think it will change. But I think the reason why it hasn't is because it's scary as hell. It's like people want to help. Like if you have a friend, let's say you have a friend or a coworker or a family member who is not okay. Either they're not okay because you suspect it, or it because they've said something. Everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to be there. But people are absolutely terrified to ask the question, are you okay? Are you thinking of taking your life? Because they don't want the answer. And it's not because they don't want to help. They just don't know how to help, which is, I think, that's, I think, a critical piece in all of this is educating everyone globally. Like, you don't have to be a therapist to help someone. You don't have to have 25 resources in your back pocket on any given day to be able to help someone. All you need to do is understand the concept of holding space, which means it really is just a glorified way of saying listening to someone, just non-judgmentally listening, showing up for someone. Let them talk, let them share what's going on. You don't have to fix it. It's not even my job as a crisis counselor to fix the problem. It's my job to listen, to give resources, to hold space, to offer support, to help de-escalate. But if you're a friend trying to help a friend or a family member, just listen and just direct someone to call the 988 crisis and support hotline, because those are the people who are trained to help.
Being present, right? Now, for someone who might be feeling hopeless or contemplating suicide, what would you say to them, and what resources would you encourage them to reach out to?
Well, first and foremost, I would ask, it doesn't matter if it's someone who's super close to me, someone maybe I know peripherally. How I know someone does not change how I ask this question. Doesn't matter who you are. If I know you're struggling, I'm going to ask you very directly, are you okay? Are you thinking of harming yourself? Have you done anything to try and harm yourself? That's the question we all need to be asking, using those exact words, even though they're scary. They're not going to put the idea in someone's head. If anything, it will have the absolute reverse effect. It's going to show someone that you're a safe space, that you can be trusted, that you're being honest with them, you see them, you hear them, you want to support them. As far as what to do, I think, the first thing is asking, like, do you have a support system? Like, who do you have as a support system? Do you happen to have a therapist? Nothing wrong with asking someone if they have a therapist. If they don't, maybe help them find one. If they do, encourage them to contact their therapist or a family member or a friend or a spouse or a partner who they're comfortable with, or encourage them to call one of the lifelines. If they're part of the queer community, encourage them to call the Trevor Project. If they're a young person, encourage them to reach out to the Text Sam helpline for youth. If you can give somebody the resources that they need, that's what's going to be the agent of change in how this person deals with what they're navigating. So it's just a matter of showing up and asking the question.
Absolutely. Mental health can be sometimes so overwhelming, especially for people in the LGBTQ plus community. Can you speak to some of the unique challenges that LGBTQ plus individuals face when it comes to mental health and why it's so important to create safe, inclusive spaces for them?
Well, I think, like any other marginalized community, and we all know that the LGBTQ community is still somewhat marginalized, you face a lot of challenges that another maybe community wouldn't face. And it's like a stigma within a stigma. You have a stigma of mental health, and then if you're someone who's a part of the LGBTQ plus community, now all of a sudden you have the stigma of being queer attached to that. So it's like, it's like you just double down on all of your stress and the challenges that you're facing because you're kind of being hit twice. And it's feeling invalidated and feeling like you can't really come out truly and ask for the help that you need, because there are a lot of people who are part of the LGBTQ community who don't have support. Maybe they aren't fully out. Maybe they have come out and they've lost the support of their family or their friends. So not only are they still being marginalized because of the community that they're in, but now they're isolated because they don't have support. So I think that it's unfortunate that communities like the LGBTQ community, have to deal with kind of a double layer of stigma and, of, I don't want to say shame, but it is a part of the equation. Shame is a big part of the equation, and I think that leaning into organizations, for instance, like the Trevor Project and like the 988 Lifeline, that's knowing that regardless of whether you have support in your family, regardless of whether the people close to you are helpful to you, you do have people out there in the world who you can talk to, who are there 24 hours a day, who are trained to help you, who do, in some cases, really understand where you're coming from because they've come from the same place. So I think it's just a matter of recognizing that people in the LGBTQ community who are also struggling with, their mental health are, at a little bit of a disadvantage because they're dealing with probably twice as much as the average person is dealing with just because of, their sexuality or their gender. But there are people out there in the world who are available, who are there to help. And hopefully we can reach with podcasts like this, with messages like this, we can reach people who feel like they have no support and no hope, and we can show them that they do.
Absolutely. Your work really shows how vital it is to create spaces where people feel safe and supported. What can allies and mental health professionals do to make sure these spaces are created and stay strong over time?
Well, I think that it's just as important for us who are part of these communities to be doing the advocacy work and be showing up to support one another as it is for our allies. Our allies should be, in a sense, doing exactly what we're doing. They should also be having the conversations. They should also be asking the questions. They should also try to be unafraid of making mistakes. We all make mistakes, and I think a lot of people are fearful of that. So allies show up to a point and then they get nervous if I go past my comfort level. I don't want to make a mistake and alienate anyone. I don't want to come out as a false ally. But I think a big part of allyship is understanding that it's okay to question, and it's okay to make a mistake, and it's okay to recover from that. We need our allies to be as passionate about change as we are, and their advocacy as we are, as members of the community at large. So I think that we just need to stay unified, and we need to support one another. Those in the community and the allies themselves just need to keep working together, and to kind of continue to move the needle.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lisa, I would love to hear your coming out story because I know that we talked in the green room and you share a remarkable story. Can you take us back and we're going to shift gears here for a second.
Yeah.
Can you take us back to that time where you realized you were different?
Yeah. Well, I think I'd be taking you way back if that were the case, like way, 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 way back to when I was probably a teenager. But, I'm 56 years old. I came out when I was 52. So
Okay.
I'm very much a late bloomer in that way. I came out as pansexual when I was, in my early 50s. And the interesting irony is that there was absolutely no reason whatsoever for me to come out. It was not a coming out because I was in a cis relationship and then all of a sudden had fallen in love with a woman or had fallen in love with someone else and was trying to
Yeah.
get from one life into another life. Like, that wasn't it at all for me. My coming out story is unique in the sense that it was my daughter, my oldest daughter, who came out to me when she was a junior in college as bisexual. She came out to
Oh.
her dad and to me, to both of us. And after that coming out, we started having these incredible conversations about just what it meant to be queer, what it meant to be bi, what it meant to be pan, what does it mean to be ace, what does it mean to be omni, words that did not exist when I was a teenager in the 80s, when I was feeling feelings of attraction that were maybe not your standard girl attraction feelings. And I knew I had a different capacity. I always had, it's a knowing. I think anybody who has ever come out knows that there's a knowing that you have. And sometimes you can articulate it and put a word to it, and sometimes you can't. In my case, I really couldn't, because there was bi, there was gay, and there was straight. And there was really nothing in between for a very long time. And it was
Right.
because of beautiful conversations that I had with my daughter explaining things to me. And that really just unlocked things when she explained the nuances of pansexuality to me. It was like a lightning bolt. It illuminated everything inside me in a way that I hadn't seen at all. It just shined a spotlight into the places inside me that were in the shadows, that were hidden. And I felt so compelled to honor that part of me, because I felt like I was a mom. I had two daughters, two grown daughters, and had spent their entire lives as their mom, along with their dad, saying, be exactly who you are, don't compromise yourself, let yourself follow whatever path you feel is your path in life. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, all the things that you want to tell your kids. And I had told them all of that all their lives. And here I was keeping this part of me a secret. And part of that was out of fear, and part of that was out of just not knowing what the words were to use to describe myself. But once I found those words, it all became very clear to me that, any marginalized community needs representation and needs support. And I was no longer an ally. I was a part of the community, and I needed to identify that way. And so I shared it with my kids and my husband, and everybody was as supportive as you could ever imagine a family could be. And it had nothing to do with wanting to change my life or leave my husband of over almost 32 years. It was just about honoring that part of myself and kind of bringing it out into the light.
That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. Looking at your career now, how do you feel about the path you have taken? And what have been some of the most rewarding parts of your journey, both professionally and personally?
I could not feel more grateful that I'm on the path that I'm on. The work that I'm doing, I just had this conversation with my mother. I had another conversation about this with my husband just a day or two ago, saying I can't imagine doing anything else in my life. And this is the work that I know that I want to do for as long as I can possibly do it. It's work that needs to be done, it's change that needs to be made. And I feel very well equipped just by virtue of, the irony of my lived experience. I mean, we get what we get, right? And
Yeah.
we all make choices. What do we do with the things that we're given? And so I made a choice to take what I had experienced in my life and try to turn that, that pain into some purpose. And it took me to this place. And now I can't imagine ever not being in this place. And I mean, as far as what keeps me wanting to do what I'm doing, it's the conversations that I have with people all over the world who reach out and say, I saw your work, I heard you speak, I read your book, wherever it was, and you gave me the strength or the permission or the peace of mind to go ahead and share what I needed to share or what I'd been dealing with, or you encouraged me to go to therapy, or you encouraged me to come out. Those are the gifts. Those are the gifts that I get for doing what I'm doing. And I couldn't be more grateful, and I will do it until the end, whatever the end may be.
Okay. It's clear that your career is both personal and meaningful,
Mm,
and it's shaped by your experiences and your desire to make a
yeah,
difference.
yeah.
What moments stand out to you as key milestones where you saw the real impact of your work on others?
Well, I mean, I think I see that impact every day when I'm on the lifeline, and people,
Yeah.
when they, when we wrap a call and it's been a very intense call, and they say, I don't know if I would have made it today if it wasn't for you, or thank God you were the one who picked up the phone, or I'm so grateful, that you were here listening. I mean, that happens all the time. And I'm so unbelievably touched by that, and grateful to be in that position, to be I just wanted to be the person on the other end of the phone. I wanted to be the person my father never had. So I get to do that now, and I'm so lucky. And I think one of the things recently, even, that has really, some of the work that's really made a huge impact on me in a way that it's helped me see how my work has impacted the world is the creation of the Help Hub, which is a project I worked on as kind of a little passion project on the side, just accumulating resources for people who are struggling with different mental health issues. It was designed just to be kind of a resource page at the back end of my website, and it ultimately has become my website. And I've transformed everything now into this new platform called the helphub.co. And it's a place for everyone in every community to get the help and the resources and the support and the content that they need. And daily now, I'm getting feedback from people all across the mental health community, whether it be crisis organizations or platforms or helplines or everyday people who are using this platform that I created. And the feedback that I'm getting about how valuable it is and how grateful people are that it exists is blowing my mind, number one. And number two, it's just fueling me to want to just make it bigger, make it better, and continue to work on it so that we can make sure that everyone can always get the help they need when they need it most.
Absolutely. And I did went into your website and I was really blown away because mental health does have different traits, right? So
Yes.
you were able to create different resources for different individuals, like,
Mm-hmm.
depression, LGBTQ
Mm-hmm.
individuals, how to deal with grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are
Yeah. I
some,
mean, yeah, that's what I had learned in just doing my own work and spending so much time on the lifelines and understanding what people need. And while we all have such similar issues that we struggle with, like we're all affected in some way by grief. We're all affected in some way by loss. And that doesn't necessarily mean losing a human. It could mean losing a marriage or losing a job or losing a friend or losing a home or losing a person. But depending on who we are in the world, what community we're part of. We don't all experience those things the same way. I felt like there needed to be a place where anybody from any community, whether it be the BIPOC community or the queer community or the Asian community or the elderly community or veterans or parents, children, where anybody could go and it was under the same roof, they could find resources to suit them and their community and their needs. And so I didn't find that anywhere. So I built it. And now I continue to update it and to add sites and resources daily to ensure that if there's something that is not on there that people need, it's on there, that we put it on there one way or another.
Absolutely. Lisa, I just have to say, you are an absolute rock star. You have already written 3 incredible books. Life, It Is What It Is in 2014, On Time Parent Anxiety in 2017, and How to Raise Perfectly Imperfect Kids in 2019. That's an impressive lineup right there. We're nearing the end of the show, and it's time for my favorite part, the rapid fire round questions. I'm going to ask you some quick, fun questions, and you have got to answer with the first thing that pops in your head.
Okay,
you ready? If you could swap lives for one day with any LGBTQ plus icon, who would it be and why?
My God, it would be Glennon Doyle. Because
that's a good one.
Glennon is just the queen. She is a hero in every sense of the word, in my opinion. She is courageous. She is brilliant. She is just as iconic as any icon I've ever seen. And she's changing the world with
Love that.
What she puts out into the world.
What's your go-to rainbow song that instantly lifts up your mood?
We Are Family.
If you had to pick a drag name, what would it be?
A drag name? Oh
yes.
my God, I don't even know drag names. Oh my God, all I can think of is Dirk Diggler, but that's not that's not a drag name. I don't even know what drag names. Oh my God, help me, Ada. What would my drag name be?
I would have to say Twyla.
All right, I'm changing my contact name in my husband's phone.
Describe your perfect Pride celebration in 3 words.
All the love.
What's the best piece of LGBTQ plus advice you have ever received or given?
Be you all the time, no matter what.
Love that. If the LGBTQ plus community had a superhero, what would their superpower be?
Their superpower would be shooting rainbows out of their fingertips and just covering the landscape in rainbows.
What's your favorite queer inclusive quote that always sticks with you?
We can do hard things.
What's one thing you wish more people understood about the LGBTQ plus experience?
It's just life like anybody else's life. It's just, I think, in a lot of ways, a truer and more authentic life.
If you could create a new LGBTQ plus holiday, what would celebrate and what would party?
Oh my God, we would celebrate gender expression, and it would be a costume party where you had to be the most outlandish and exciting and vibrant version of who you believe you are.
I love that. Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your incredible story with us today. Your courage and dedication to breaking the silence around mental health are truly inspiring. As a 3-time suicide loss survivor, your message of hope, healing, and creating safe spaces for the LGBTQ plus community is a powerful reminder that we are never alone in our struggles. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Out of the Closet, Into the World. Remember, living your truth is a journey, and it's okay to take one step at a time. Whether you're out, still figuring things out, or standing in solidarity as an ally, know that your voice matters and your story is powerful. Together, we're building a world where love, acceptance, and authenticity are celebrated. Keep embracing who you are, keep supporting those around you, and most importantly, keep shining your light. Step out of the closet and into the world, because your truth deserves to be seen, heard, and celebrated. Stay strong, stay proud, and stay you. With gratitude, Ada. Until next time. Thank you so much for watching and listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to follow me on social media to stay updated and join this movement. I would love to hear your thoughts, so comment below. With gratitude, Ada.